3 Lives 3 Worlds. The Pillow Book. Lower volume. Original work by Tangqi Gongzi. English translation, Hamster 428. English editing, Rockharlequin, Lily, JoannaKuang. Part 4 The Shadow's Souls. Chapter 11. Fengju went to bed early and fully clothed when night fell. She had a feeling Chen Ye might be tormenting himself tonight, and had thus been ill at ease waiting for the old steward to come back with news. After half an hour of waiting and seeing neither the steward's voice nor face, she became increasingly anxious and simply got out of bed to put her slippers on with the intention to secretly sneak to Mengchun Manor for a peek. Fengju sighed to herself that she was being too dedicated. Even Arania may not have been as solicitous in those days as she was now. While sighing, she suddenly heard chirping of birds drifting in from outside the window. The estate did not keep any birds, so how unusual it was to hear birds singing here. She pushed the door and glanced outside. Fengju didn't think she had ever been so astonished. Because Arania had loved natural whimsies, each scenery and object in the estate was plain and simple. Even this courtyard looked quite ordinary. The most special place was perhaps a mere old tree in the middle of the courtyard with climbing roots entwined. When the sun was high, it was an ideal place to enjoy the breeze. But right now, when the bright moon was shining in the sky, she saw wreath after wreath of flowers linking into a floating sea of fullings. Luminous birds of a species she did not recognize flew forth from the flower sea in the wind. On the ground was a carpet of snow-white flowers. Slightly above this carpet were floating night-blooming cereus of a blue hue. They were like tiny lanterns suspended in the air. The purple-robed deity idly stood under the flowering tree. In his mouth was half a toffee fox. His head was bowed while he fiddled with a flower wreath in his hands. When he noticed her opening the door, he gazed at her for a moment, then raised the completed wreath in her direction and said, "Come." Fengju did not move for a long time. A few birds cleverly picked up the flower wreath from Zai's hand, then flew and placed it onto Fengju's head. It was a ring of zen twigs decorated by tiny flowers in white and blue. It seemed to fit her head just right. Fengju remained leaning against the door, frozen. Many thoughts instantly drifted into her mind. One such thought was that Jian had often boasted this and that of his 10-mile peach orchard. Now it seemed, besides bearing 10 miles of peaches, his peach orchard was much less pretty than this flower sea. Another such thought was that Qinan Palace was quite far away, yet Zai's was in the courtyard at this moment, meaning he had hurried back. Should she invite him inside for a cup of hot tea? Another such thought was that in history, ancient male deities made flower wreaths for their sweethearts as a token of love. That Zai's had gone so far as to send her one in exchange for the toffee foxes showed he was either too polite or he hadn't read history books. Within the bird chirping, while her mind was overworked with thoughts, Zai's remained standing idly under the flowering tree. "Come, I'll take you to the Maiden Festival." Those words drifted over and seemed to carry with them an invisible force. When she came towards Zai's, her skirt swept along the carpet of flowers and sent bright sparks alight as they fluttered round her ankles. Fengju walked to and fro and kicked up more petals, lighting up even more specks of light. The flock of birds in the bespeckled space also flapped jubilantly. She kicked gaily and said to Zai's in delight, "It isn't often you make this place so beautiful, let's stay here to play for a while." "Can we not go?" Before she could finish, her waist was seized. The word outside had just landed when the two of them seemed to be standing in the imperial city's night market. In the sky were sparkling stars, on the ground were luminous lanterns. Fulling and serious flowers hung mid-air while underneath was a clamor of voices. Fengju watched the sprinkling petals in the sky in bemusement. Did you cover the entire imperial city in this illusion? At that very moment, two young ladies out for a frolic walked past them and left a few floating words behind. I bet some deity is in a good mood tonight. He must have created this beautiful illusion during the maiden festival to please his sweetheart. How timely we also get to see it. He's so doting, his sweetheart's a lucky girl. The lucky Fengju was bent on chasing after Zais into the marketplace. She couldn't fully catch what the young ladies were saying. But in her chase, she didn't forget to say, even though it doesn't require strong magic to create this illusion, it has to be exhausting to cast it across such a great distance. Look at you, you were gravely injured not long ago, but you don't know how to think for your own good at all. I really don't understand why you would do something so reckless. Ah, but how would you know? I've forgotten about your body's injuries just now at the garden too. Zais looked as though she had asked a silly question. Didn't those two just say? I'm in a good mood tonight. Fengju was greatly confused. I've never seen you in this good of a mood. Why are you feeling especially happy today? Zais pointed to the toffee fox which had lost its shape. You gave me this. Fengju felt her throat tightening. She wordlessly watched the toffee fox, then wordlessly glanced to Zais and at length said, Are you that happy just because I gave you some toffee foxes? Zais' voice was soft when he throated a yes. His gaze was deep as he looked at her. Your giving me toffee foxes made me very happy. Do you know why I came back to accompany you to the maiden festival? Why I made the illusion you like? The moment Zais throated a yes, Fengju's foxy heart had already melted into a puddle of water. By the time she listened to these words of his, that puddle of water almost evaporated into foam. What a pitiful lad! He didn't have parents and didn't receive any love when he was young. She only gave him a few insignificant toffee foxes, but he was already made this happy. What a grateful lad he was, too. So many people she gifted toffee foxes to, but only he repaid her in such an earnest way. If others paid double for small favors, he simply paid triple. Fengju gave Zais a knowing look. Her voice carried with it love and affection. I do. I know it all. After some silence, Zais said, I don't think you do. Fengju looked at him sympathetically. In today's world, Zai's sentiment of profuse repayment was very rare. It must not be easy for him to find other kindred spirits. Zais must be a very lonely person. Since there were too many who didn't understand him, when he met someone who did such as her, he wouldn't be able to accept it right away. There was no reason to force him. The more she looked at him, the more her heart was slowly overtaken by a wave of maternal love. What a pity she couldn't return to his childhood and reincarnate as his mother to care for him. She couldn't help but comfort his shoulder. If you say I don't, then I don't. We'll go with whatever you say. She looked at his hand. There's nothing but the stick left of that toffee fox. Have you finished the other 9? Do you like eating this? I didn't bring any more with me, but there should be some pastries in the night market. I'll buy you 2 boxes. Shall I make you more when we go home? Or I can make you something else. This isn't the only thing I know how to make. Zeiss watched her for a long time, then softly said, I'm not picky. I'll eat whatever you make. He then added, I'm glad you care so much for me. Fengju was near tears. These words he said were so intimate. She knew other lonely people, but none as gentle and considerate as Zeiss. This made Zeiss seem even more precious to her. Fengju studied his face and thought he must have been a thoughtful and adorable child. How did he grow so big with no parents to raise him? How many grievances did he receive? It was a pity she couldn't buy everything he hadn't known in his childhood this instant and show him how to have a good time. Filled with love and affection, she grabbed Zei's sleeve and said ever so generously, Let's go, I'll take you to go have fun. Maiden Festival literally means a festival for young ladies. Immortals outside Fanyan Valley didn't know of this festival, but 200 years ago, Fengju was a regular visitor to the mortal realm. She naturally had some knowledge and recognized that the Qiqiao festival on July 7 in the mortal realm was somewhat similar to this. But of course, the immortals' festivals were far more interesting. For example, on each lantern hung along the street was painted an auspicious animal that could speak and move. Even if it was only a floral lantern, the sound of wind blowing over a flower field could also be heard when one leaned in closer. Or for example, the dough figurines from the clay stall were also in all sorts of weird animal forms. The dough figure selling lad took some leftover clay and shaped a harp out of it. He next stuck it on a stick and placed it with the other colorful clay figurines. The harp was made out of clay, but it could actually produce music. Fengju thought it was interesting and looked at it for a few moments more when she heard Zeiss asking her from above, Do you like this harp? When she heard Zeiss's way of asking, she unconsciously thought of her cousin, the little doe. The little doe was a very tactful child. He was never transparent about what he wanted. For example, when she took him down to the mortal realm, he stared at a sunny side-up egg with huge watery eyes and wrung his shirt as he sheepishly asked her, Fengjujija, do you want sesame pancakes? She would then know the little doe wanted to have sesame pancakes. Zei's question at this time was just like the little doe's. The young lad who was facing Zeiss said most persuasively, Sir, you have very keen eyes, indeed. Although my reputation as the dough figure man is but false fame, I'm in fact an expert at shaping harps. Many gentlemen in the city patronize my stall to buy clay harps for their sweethearts. This is the last one of the day, if you want, I'll. He hadn't finished when Fengju tossed a gold leaf onto the stall's surface. Good, I'll take it. Wrap it up for me. The young lad closed his dropped jaw and stuttered, Will the young lady be buying this? Don't gentlemen usually buy it for the ladies? Zeiss hadn't had a chance to react when Fengju already took the dough figure and placed it into his hands. Her voice was unusually loving. You never got to play with dough figures as a kid, right? This is made from rice flour, but it can't be eaten. Place it by your bedside and it can be played with for a few days. If you want something that can be eaten, there is a sugar painting shop ahead, I'll buy you some. She expectantly asked, Do you like this harp? Zeiss looked at her with difficulty for a moment, then appropriately answered. Yes. Feeling satisfied, Fengju turned to the stunned lad and generously said, He liked this thing you made a lot. Very well done, keep the change, it's my gratitude for your crafting skill. The dough figure man dazedly withdrew his hands with the silver tails as he watched the retreating figure of Fengju in admiration, murmuring a praise, "What an amazing woman!" Fengju bought for Zai's 2 sugar fire-breathing dragon paintings and 2 boxes of cake as promised. Along the way, Zai asked her if she wanted a biennial feather shuttlecock, a cypress fox mask that could raise its eyebrows, and a bagwalak that would hum if it was put together incorrectly. She bought them all, a shuttlecock, a mask, and a lock for him. After she bought them, she never failed to pleasantly ask Zai whether he liked them or not. Needless to say, Zai could only answer he did. Once she heard Zai say he liked them, Fengju couldn't help but feel happy, couldn't help but reward the vendors selling those souvenirs. Her purse was empty for the rest of the night's stroll, but she was very satisfied. 3 or 4 playful masked children ran in front of them. One of the taller kids jumped up and reached for an aerial night blooming cereus. As though they had feelings, the flower blossoms darted away. The child was stunned for a moment, then giggled and ran off. Fengju suddenly remembered her own devilish childhood. She turned and cheerfully said to Zai, "I was just like them. I used to also love running around in the streets." There really were many interesting things in her childhood. She was enraptured in recounting them to Zai as they walked. "I had a classmate in those days, he was a grey wolf. Once, I didn't let him copy my homework. So while I was napping in class, he made the fur on my body, he made my feathers all black." Zai brushed away the stray light specks on her head. "You were often bullied as a child." Fengju raised her brow. "How could that be? All my classmates couldn't wait to flatter me. Only Grey Wolf Diddy dared to defy me from time to time. Of course, I've always had my revenge. Our teacher took us to the mountains for herbology once. On the way back, we stayed on the mountain overnight. I went into the woods to catch a rabbit, and while Grey Wolf Diddy fell asleep, I stuffed the rabbit under his belly. Early next morning I told him he gave birth in his dream, and that I even helped him deliver the cub. Grey Wolf Diddy was scared to tears on the spot." "Well done," chuckled Zai. "But then he found out that I played him," she sighed, "so he chased after me for 2 whole months." "Only 2 months?" Fengju reluctantly gave him a glance. "Because 2 months later were the final exams. He wanted to copy my ancient history answers." Zai nodded. "So you were good at ancient history?" Fengju had a moment of jolt, but she immediately put aside her distracting thoughts and candidly replied, "It's because I used to worship a revered deity when I was young. He was a great hero in prehistoric times." The entire collection of history books was essentially a list of his glorious accomplishments, so it's not a surprise I was good at history. Seeing Zai suddenly stop walking, she also stopped. "Truthfully, I even thought to study hard on his favorite subject in those days. Unfortunately, his favorite subject was Buddhist philosophy. It was something I couldn't do even if I tried. I didn't quite understand why he tried to learn things like Buddhism when he fought and killed all day long in the past. Then one day I finally came to understand. People who wielded swords to kill didn't necessarily abstain from discussing Buddhism. Actually, he also enjoyed fishing, but unfortunately my teacher didn't have a fishing class. She finished speaking and sighed in nostalgic pity. When she looked up, Zai's eyes contained a look she didn't quite comprehend. His hand stroked the slightly crooked flower wreath on her head as he lowered his voice. "You've done so much for him." Recognizing that it was a praise for her, she sheepishly pulled the cypress mask over her face. A muffled voice came out from behind the mask. "It was nothing. Just my being foolish in those childish days." Suddenly hearing a boisterous cheer ahead, she tiptoed to look and at once held on to Zai's sleeves. Sounding a lot more pleasant than a moment ago, she excitedly said, "It seems the girls are throwing potpourri sachets ahead. Come in, let us go and take a look." Fengju had heard of the Bianiao clan's maiden festival and its tradition of girls throwing scented sachets. It was said that in the city, a tower would rise from the ground at night. It was called the Vega Tower. Millions of years ago, Queen Vega of the Vega Star had gifted it to a Bianiao prince as a token of love. Though the mistress of Vega Star had been lavish, the Bianiaos did not marry outsiders. Despite having a short courtship, the two could only rue in the end that it wasn't meant to be. They left behind this solitary tower which only re-emerged on the night of the maiden festival. Girls with secret longings climbed it and professed their feelings on this night. According to folklore, girls would bring their hand-embroidered sachets and ascend the tower. If their heart's desired happened to come by, they'd throw their sachets at them. He who was of the same mind would catch the sachet, he who was not would throw it away. He who caught a sachet shall accompany the sachet's owner on a night stroll. Fengju genuinely thought that this tradition was both romantic and fun. If King Kaiyu had these things tens of thousands of years ago, Migu wouldn't have been single till now. In high spirits, she led Zais all the way to Vega Tower. On their way they saw the lad who sold them the dough figure. "Miss, you seem to be in a hurry," he called after them. "Are you going to Vega Tower? I have one piece of advice for you. Your gentleman here is too handsome, you must not go to that place." Fengju didn't forget to turn around in spite of her hurry and thanked the lad. She merrily said, "We're only going there to join the crowd. He's already taken, he won't randomly receive the ladies' sachets." "Thank you for your reminder." He said something that was drowned out in the crowd, but what he said reminded Fengju, who worriedly asked Zais, "Did you hear what I say?" With natural ease, Zais took her hand in his lest they became separated in the moving mass. I'm already taken." Fengju pulled the mask down and put on a serious expression. "Ah, I said that too, but that's not the point. The important thing is that you should never randomly receive sachets from any of those girls, do you understand?" She had forgotten to tell him so a moment ago. Zais was a lonesome person without a childhood. Right now, whatever he saw was bound to feel novel. She could tell from the way he expressed interest in the shuttlecock, the mask, and the bagwalak. If he also felt the girl's sachets were novel and caught one out of curiosity, that girl would think her wish was fulfilled. When they found out he only intended to play, these girls would be in for a world of hurt. And if they took things too hard, they might even throw themselves down Vega Tower. At this thought, a burst of bitterness arose in her heart. She said to him again, "You are absolutely not allowed to take any of their sachets, understood?" Zai's gaze lingered on her face. Understood," he said, an imperceptible smile displaying on his lips. "Are you sure?" I'm sure. Fengzhu exhaled in relief. Unfortunately, she had been too naive in her thinking. The moment they arrived at Vega Tower, countless scented pouches came flying at them. Fengzhu frowned. In legends, this act of sachet tossing was nothing more than a try at chance which depended on fate. But the sachets that were falling onto Zai's body presently were sticking firmly to him. Wasn't this a bit too aggressive? She finally got what the doe-figure lad was saying. From the tower came a burst of fragrant air. A row of giggling girls leaned over the balcony while another queue happily climbed downstairs to meet the gentleman who got hit with the sachets, Lord Zai's, to redeem the implicit promise. The cosmetic vendor standing next to Fengzhu gave her a sympathetic look. "Miss, you must be from elsewhere. Did you come here tonight with your sweetheart?" Fengzhu paid little attention to Zai's being called her sweetheart. She stepped closer and said, "Auntie, how did you know we're not from here? Then you must know why these sachets won't fall down." The elderly woman had been selling cosmetic under Vega Tower nearly all her life, of course she knew why. Her expression was complicated when she told her, before, these sachets were only ordinary sachets and Vega Tower was the luckiest ground to wish for romance. Then 100 years ago, an extraordinarily handsome man appeared, the dream husband of many a young lady. Because they wanted to be his companion for just one night, they combined their efforts and made these sachets so that they would stick onto his body without falling to the ground. She sighed sadly. The handsome man was therefore forced to accompany 73 young ladies on a stroll around the imperial city on that maiden festival night with the meager strength of one person. I still remember that night. It was such a spectacle to behold. Fengzhu imagined the scene in her head and remarked, "That would indeed be a spectacle. I wonder whom among those 73 ladies the handsome man married afterward." But no matter whom, it must have been a beautiful tale. The elderly woman again gave her a sympathetic glance. "Afterward?" "Afterward, this gentleman from 9 generations of only sons turned homosexual." Stunned, Fengzhu suddenly turned and looked back at Zai's. No wonder most of the men who passed under the tower tonight were duds and scraps. No wonder Zai's was covered with sachets the moment he got here. He was able to protect her from the sachets thanks to his agility, but because of that, he wasn't able to protect himself. She was the one who insisted on bringing Zai's here. It was unintentional, but if Zai's ended up following the footsteps of their predecessor and also turning homosexual because of this, that was simply unthinkable. Not daring to imagine any more, she grabbed Zai's hand and pulled him into a sprint. Behind them was the vague sounds of miffed women. "Sir, don't run away." She pulled Zai's and ran as fast as her legs could carry her. The crowd cleared the way to let them through. Urgent wind followed them as several fallen cereus blossoms were crushed under their feet. Street light gradually diminished. Zai's, who was dragged behind her, unhurriedly spoke, "Why did we suddenly run away?" At these words, Fengzhu recalled the girls on the tower and shuddered. "How can we not? Are you saying you want to spend a night accompanying them around the capital?" Zai's paused. "You don't want me to go with them?" He pulled Fengzhu into a small alley. Although lamplight was sparse, there were more fulling and cereus blossoms here than there were lanterns at the marketplace. With the moonlight peeking through the clouds, it was actually quite bright. Fengju stopped and panted as she thought to herself what a silly question he was asking. Of course I don't want you to become homosexual because of them. However, she had been running and talking at the same time, and couldn't help but breathe raggedly. She couldn't even say at this second and could only manage a nod. This nod seemed to have pleased Zeiss. Fulling and serious flowers slowly drifted in the air. The alley was oddly quiet with her breathing being the only sound. They had been running in haste, but the flower wreath on her head had not come off. Her untied hair hung down from under the wreath like a black stretch of satin, wisps of hair plastering on her perspiring forehead. The phoenix blossom mark on her forehead was alarmingly exquisite. A flush surfaced her snow-white face. She was indeed very pretty, but because she was still young, she hadn't dealt with the amorous world at all. Yet at this time, she actually gave off the allure of a more sophisticated woman. The cypress mask hung on her neck, its fox ears scraping her jaw. Feeling uncomfortable, she pulled on it but it only bounced back at her. She pushed again, looking somewhat childish in her effort. Zeiss stepped closer and helped her hold the mask. He just held it like that. He didn't say whether he would help her remove it or not. His beautiful eyes continued to behold her face. Not knowing what to do, Fengju also raised her eyes to look back at him. They stood staring at each other for a while this way when she slowly felt the atmosphere wasn't feeling quite right. Seeing Zeiss leaning over, she hastened to take a step back and said, "I haven't ran like this in so long." Her subsequent words were prevented by Zeiss. He threw away the mask with one hand and held her waist with the other, then lowered to her lips and whispered, "Me too." Fengju blinked and pushed Zeiss away, but he did not move. His breath grazed across her lips, tickling her. Her hands were placed on his chest. She wasn't able to push him, but it was also odd if she didn't push. So she gave another try, but he still did not move. As she was about to push again, the hold at her waist suddenly tightened, pulling her entire being against his body. She started and let out a cry. Just as she detected a smile flashing in his dark eyes, her mouth was instantly invaded by a softness. Her head boomed, shocked to realize it was his tongue. His placid eyes seemed to be lit with moonlight. He continued to harass her tongue. She didn't know to what extent he intended to push her, vaguely feeling that this wasn't the way to go. She began to move her rigid tongue and sensed Zeiss stiffen. Feeling encouraged, she clumsily entwined Zeiss' tongue, wanting to force him back. Zeiss watched her fixedly, coordinating his actions with hers to let her crush against his tongue until she completely entered his mouth. She was sometimes very competitive, and often loved to show off. Once her desire to flex her muscles developed, it couldn't be recalled. A scent of white sandalwood overwhelmed her. It had come from Zeiss' body. Her mind a blank coupled with her competitive instinct, all she knew was that she wanted to push Zeiss with nowhere to turn. She placed her hands on his shoulders, stood on tiptoes, crushed her lips against his, and explored her tongue around his mouth, thinking to herself she was being offensive all the while. Much later, she quietly left Zeiss and felt some numbness and ache on her tongue, and quite breathless. Zeiss' breathing was steadying, his nose touching hers. He moved his lips to the corner of her mouth and brushed her bottom lip. This gentle touch sent quivers across her body. He lingered on her lips a moment more, then released her. The cypress mask was once again replaced to her neck, its fox ears still poking at her chin. It was as if suspended time had begun its flow again. The Sirius which gathered nearby quietly parted, making a trace of dotted light like summer fireflies. Fengju was dumbfounded for a stretch of time and stunned for a while more. After realizing what she had done, she became reticent for a length. Zeiss raised his hand to the flower wreath on her head. She stepped away to avoid his touch, rending his hand hanging mid-air. At this moment, a night-blooming Sirius fell at his fingertips, its light shattering like ripples on his palm. Her shadow spoke in the dark, I. A long time passed but she could not say anything else. A while later, not hearing Zeiss speak, she said with some embarrassment and confusion, I don't know what I was doing. I was very happy tonight, like I had been in my childhood when there was no worry or sorrow. In fact, for a while I had been all sorts of happy. Zeiss looked at her. Why aren't you happy anymore? She held back her fluster and struggled to feign composure. You've been helping me out a lot lately. I think what we have could be considered friendship. Maybe I've done something to make you misunderstand, but I didn't mean to. Even though we are married on paper, it's not something either of us wanted. Let's be friends, what do you think? And you think this is better, he said with a softened voice. Then who were you thinking about just now? Who was she thinking about? Of course she wasn't thinking about anyone. She just felt she must have been possessed to try to flaunt that kind of thing. She shook her head like a rattle drum and said, I wasn't thinking about anyone. Don't accuse me. Wishing he would just forget what had happened, she added, I heard it's good to not have desires and illusions. I was never like that before, and I don't want to be like that now. I don't want to have any false hope or dream, nor do I want to become someone else's dream or hope. Do you understand what I'm saying? Zeiss quietly studied her. As she was saying these words, he could not detect the same innocence that had been there when they were running amidst serious blooms. Her expression now contained a rare cautiousness. As expected, it was still too soon. He sometimes felt that she was very smart, but she was also very dense, and sometimes she was dense and smart all at once. To lower her guard, it seemed he could only first do as she wished. His eyes rested on her for a moment. Then he said, that was just residual venom that hasn't cleared away. What were you thinking? Fengju was befuddled. When Zeiss kissed her moments ago, she thought he was either poisoned or he had liked her. She didn't think he could be so unlucky to be poisoned twice, so she thought it must have been the latter case. She even kissed him back. She was obviously not in her right mind. She had gathered her courage, thinking she was taking a step back in order for Zeiss to confess with his dignity intact. She hadn't expected it to be the lingering poison. Maybe she caught the poison from him too, and all of this was due to poison. Since Zeiss asked what she was thinking, he must have heard from her words that she thought he liked her. He was certainly implying that she was thinking too much. Cher really did think too much. At this thought, her face immediately flushed in shame and she offered him a dry chuckle. Oh, so it was the residual venom. I'm a cautious person, so sometimes it's easy for me to overthink. Don't make fun of me, ha 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 ha. But this venom is really potent. It's been more than 10 days yet you still have residual poison lingering around. Isn't it a concern? Zeiss looked at her for a moment in silence, then said as appropriate, the serpent's venom should be potent, but it's not too much of a concern. Fengju leaned back against the wall, momentarily didn't know what else to say. Zeiss no longer spoke, the air was thick with awkwardness. You must have been so uncomfortable when the poison acted, she said at last. Zeiss calmly replied, I'm just hanging on with forbearance. Fengju let escape an "oh" before the alley fell into silence again. In this silence, she called to mind a question. She wanted to hold back but wasn't able to and ended up asking, if you were hanging on with forbearance, then why didn't you try to endure it just now? It's not good to suppress oneself too much, he replied in frankness. You said we're going to be friends. If we are friends, you shouldn't mind such a little thing, should you? Fengju didn't know why she was feeling a little irritated, but Zei's words made sense. Moreover, if she became angry right now, it would only show that her generosity was too paltry. She had to continue laughing and said, of course I wouldn't mind, but you've put up with it for so long. Zei's gaze bored into her. Because I've put up with it for so long, when I don't need to put up with it, I just don't. Without waiting for Fengju to answer, he clutched his chest and frowned as though he was in pain. The wound seems to have reopened when we were running just now. It hurts a bit. Let's go back. 10 days of lingering poison and a wound which hadn't healed, yet Zeiss actually said it wasn't a concern. What a liar. Fengju tended to fret over others sometimes. At this point, she was too flustered that she forgot everything. There was only one concern in her mind. She stepped forward and held Zeiss. Your injury doesn't seem to be healing very well. Had I known this, I wouldn't have made you go out. Let's hurry back. I'll call someone to treat it for you. She worriedly supported Zeiss, not noticing the smile forming on his mouth. Cha-Cha was still at Qinan Shrine. Her young substitute looked quite clever, but was ultimately not as good as Cha-Cha was in certain things because of her young age, for example, the problem of where Zeiss would be staying tonight. If it were Cha-Cha, she reckoned, she would sneak in another porcelain pillow on Fengju's bed when no one was around. Instead, her young substitute was a little more cautious. She appropriately asked for Fengju's opinion. Your Highness, would it be okay to arrange his lordship to stay in the guest room as usual? You've already prepared both the east and west wings for him, but I'm not sure if his lordship prefers the east or the west. At this time, Zeiss was lazily lying on Fengju's bed. The apothecary had just arrived to check his wound. There had really been no wound, but unexpectedly, Fengju went as far as calling for a doctor in the middle of the night. Seeing as deception sorcery involving blood could not deceive immortals, he quite simply gave himself another injury on the chest. His resting at this time was actually legitimate. Fengju yawned and asked Zeiss, it's not early anymore. Do you want to stay in the eastern wing or the western wing? Zeiss' chest was bandaged, his eyes closed. He replied without looking up, I don't think I'll be able to move. I'll probably have to stay here tonight. Fengju fought to keep her eyes open, yawned and said, that's fine too. You can sleep here tonight, I'll go to the eastern chamber to rest. Ah, I should leave a servant here to wait on you. If anything happens, send him to alert me." Zais still didn't move. How can a servant be as thorough as a friend? He lowered his voice as though he was doubtful of her. "I thought you said we were good friends." Fengju's head was prickling. Good friends. She did say this. But when she said those words, she was thinking of warrior Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan was also her close friend who often drank and shared stories with her. Despite not being very cultured, he had been trying to become cultured. But this good friend, Zais? He was more like her boss. She helplessly scratched her head and said in defeat, "All right, but if the poison acts up tonight, you'll need to endure it." Then she pointed to the 6-panel screen and bade the young maid, "Place a small divan beyond the wall screen for me." Fengju had always been soft-hearted, her maternal instinct was also very easily excited. Tonight, she was overflowing with motherly love. Even without Zai's egging, she might have stayed to personally look after him. Regrettably, Zais had unwittingly kissed her. This kiss made her motherly heart suddenly drop into the depths of an icy abyss. Zai's retrospection was right. That one step he took had been too fast. Fortunately, when his mind returned, he was able to salvage half of that step. Zais temporarily rested at Fengju's estate for the next few days. Whenever she wanted to leave for something, the symptoms of his injuries seemed to recur. As a close friend, she naturally couldn't do anything else besides watching over him at all times. Luckily, watching over Zais wasn't too boring. She was even gaining more knowledge when she was with him. For example, tea drinking. She had always thought the sort of tea brewing using black glazed cups per Donghua style was already so particular. Now looking at Zais, she realized such attention wasn't even that particular. The mood of tea drinking lay in 8 words: unity of heaven and earth, use local materials. It was early summer or thereabout. Several lotuses bloomed in the estate. Zais told her to look for a few lotus blossoms and put some coarse tea inside them. After one night, the tea leaves would be infused with lotus scent. Then on the next day, they could steep this tea using mountain spring water. Even if they were drinking out of a big mug, the flavor would be so wonderfully natural, it'd still be an enjoyable experience. Another example, the blooming garden. All she knew to do was snapping off a few branches and sticking them into a vase. She hadn't heard of placing them into a bowl before. On the other hand, Zais was so idle, he found a large bowl to make into a planter and filled it up with silt. He then chose a few twigs among the plants in the garden and planted them into the sand. Next, he decorated the arrangement with lingbai stones and sparsely mixed small flower buds in between, resulting in a beautiful miniature landscape. He used the rest of the flower branches to make into butterflies or rabbits for her sometimes. They also played chess occasionally. Needless to say, she wasn't his opponent, but he didn't beat her all the time. From time to time, he also let her win 1 or 2 games. Nevertheless, he did this with such cleverness that made it fun and logical, and never left any traces behind. When she couldn't sleep, he'd read to her from across the screen. His deep voice and the gentle breeze soon brought her to her dreams. Often at times like this, she thought to herself finding a cultured friend wasn't an easy thing. Imaginably, if Xiao Yan were to read to her, she was sure he wouldn't recognize half of the words in the book and would stop to ask her. He'd only stress her out even more. The more they got along, the more she came to believe that Zeiss was an incredible person. With him by her side, time seemed to pass so effortlessly, she didn't notice the hour anymore. That day, she put in the effort and personally went to the kitchen to prepare Zeiss' medicine. Across the corridor was a clump of young bamboo, behind which were two maidservants in private chat. Their whispers inadvertently floated into her ears. "I bet his lordship is actually very affectionate toward our princess. I heard the flower sea raining over the city last night during the Maiden Festival was created by his lordship. It must have moved her highness. Ever since, the princess and his lordship have shut themselves inside from day till night for 6 full days. Hey, maybe our estate will soon be welcoming a little prince. Say, should we start preparing some baby clothes? When that day comes, we'll ask Cha-Cha-Jija to bring them to the little prince. I feel excited just thinking of our little prince wearing the little garments we make while chasing after butterflies in the courtyard. His lordship's actions need to be quicker." Fengju slipped and almost fell into the pond beside her, but was able to hold onto the fence thanks to her quickness. After hearing these remarks, she came to realize she had stayed with Zeiss for 6 days. She was never one to sit still, thus she was sincerely surprised that she could stay inside cramped quarters for all of 6 days this time. She also heard these maidservants say Zeiss had deep affections for her. They were even looking forward to the two of them making a little prince behind closed doors. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. A corner of her mouth twitched all the way to the kitchen. When she brought the medicine back to the room, she was going to tell this interesting story to Zeiss, but she did not find him inside the bright and spacious room. There was only a note left on the long table near the window. The handwriting on the note was quick and light, and fairly impressive. The words conveyed that he needed to go on a trip and would be coming back either today or tomorrow. What he went out to do, he did not say. End of chapter 11.